My wife cheated while I was recovering from an accident, showed no remorse, so I made her regret it. It is said that moments of weakness reveal a person's true character. And for me, this was never more apparent than during the time I was recovering from a severe accident. I was vulnerable, in pain, and relying on my wife to be there for me as I struggled to regain some semblance of normalcy. But what I did not expect was the betrayal that awaited me during this fragile period. My wife, the woman I trusted more than anyone, not only cheated on me while I was bedridden, but showed absolutely no remorse for her actions. She seemed unfazed, as if nothing had happened. The betrayal cut deeper than the physical injuries I was recovering from. But instead of spiraling into despair, something within me snapped. I realized that if she could show no regret for her actions, then I would make sure she would regret ever doing it. What happened next completely changed the course of my life, and I knew that once I took action, there would be no going back. Stay tuned to hear what unfolded. It had been a long few months since my accident, and every single day felt like a relentless struggle. I had always prided myself on being active, always on my feet, and always the one who others could rely on. But when the accident happened, it was as if everything came to a sudden and painful halt. I was confined to a hospital bed, unable to even take a single step without help. It broke me down in ways I never expected. The world that once felt within my grasp now seemed distant and foreign. The physical pain was overwhelming, but it was the emotional turmoil that truly weighed heavily on me. I was vulnerable, broken, and desperately trying to regain a sense of normalcy. I had been married to Claire for over 10 years. She was the woman I had chosen to spend my life with, and we had weathered many storms together. We had faced challenges, celebrated victories, and supported each other in every conceivable way. Or so I thought. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, I had high hopes that Claire would be the one to be my rock, my support system during the hardest time of my life. After all, that was what marriage was supposed to be about, being there for each other in sickness and in health. But instead of the compassion and support I expected, I found myself growing more isolated by the day. Claire seemed distant, distracted, and at times downright cold. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, and perhaps I was being overly sensitive, but something felt off. At first, I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was just the stress of the situation. After all, I was the one who had changed so drastically. But as time went on, the cracks in our relationship grew wider. Little things started standing out. Texts she would quickly hide when I walked into the room, late nights out with vague excuses, and even a sense of emotional detachment that I couldn't ignore. It all felt wrong, but I tried to push those thoughts away. I needed to focus on my recovery, on getting better. But deep inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't until one fateful day that everything I'd been sensing came to a head in a way I could never have imagined. As the days went by after my release from the hospital, I found myself spiraling further into confusion and self-doubt. The more I tried to focus on my physical healing, the more I realized that something wasn't right with my marriage. Claire had always been my pillar of support. We had been through so much together. From financial struggles to family drama, we had faced it all, yet we always came out stronger on the other side. But now, her behavior felt like a stranger's touch. Her affection had dwindled to a bare minimum, and her presence felt more like an obligation than a choice. I started noticing her absence more often. Late nights at work, weekend plans she would conveniently forget to mention, and the constant, almost secretive checking of her phone. I had asked her if something was wrong, but she always brushed it off with the same excuse. I'm just stressed from everything going on. But that wasn't the real issue. I knew that. I wasn't blind. I had been too focused on my own recovery to really confront what was happening. The emotional distance, the lack of connection. It was as though she was emotionally checked out, and I was just a man in her life to fulfill the marriage role without any real connection. One night, I came home early from a follow-up doctor's appointment. I was feeling a bit stronger, a bit more hopeful, and eager to spend time with Claire, but when I walked into the living room, I found her on the couch, her phone in hand. She immediately hid it behind her back as soon as she noticed me. A simple, subtle act that made my heart sink. Her reaction was almost automatic, like she had been caught doing something wrong. At that moment, I knew. The voice inside my head that had been whispering doubt now became deafening. I tried to rationalize the situation, telling myself that I was overthinking it, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I began doing my own investigation, which only made matters worse. I checked her phone while she was in the shower. The text messages were impossible to ignore. Messages between Claire and a man I recognized from her work, a friend, a colleague, someone I had even met once or twice at social gatherings. It was clear that their relationship had crossed the line into something more than just friendly exchanges. The tone of their messages, the inside jokes, the hints at secret meetings, it was all there, written in black and white. I was furious, betrayed, but more than anything, I felt completely helpless. Here I was, recovering from a life-altering accident, and my wife, the person I had trusted above all else, had cheated on me. The weight of this revelation hit me like a truck. It wasn't just the physical pain of my injury anymore. It was the emotional devastation that took over every fiber of my being. When Claire came out of the shower, I confronted her. There was no screaming, no yelling, no dramatics, just a quiet, cold realization that everything had changed. She didn't deny it. In fact, she seemed almost indifferent to it. No tears, no apology, just a shrug and a half-hearted explanation. She told me that she had felt neglected while I was recovering, that she had needed someone to fill the void, to make her feel alive again. It was as if the emotional abandonment I had been experiencing for months was now laid bare, and instead of facing it with remorse, she had taken comfort in another man's arms. I didn't have the strength to argue anymore. I had been emotionally drained for so long. I just walked away and let the silence fill the room. It was then that I made a decision. I could not and would not live with this. I deserved better. My recovery journey had been hard enough without the added weight of betrayal. I did not need to be with someone who could so easily disregard everything we had built together. It was clear that Claire was no longer the woman I thought I knew. I spent the next few days in isolation, reflecting on everything. I thought about the future, about what my life would be like without her, and about what I truly deserved. And after those long days of reflection, I realized that I had no intention of staying in a relationship that lacked respect, trust, and emotional connection. The pain I felt was not just from my physical injury, but from the realization that my wife had chosen someone else while I had been vulnerable and weak. It was then that I knew what I had to do. I was not going to beg for her to stay or grovel for her forgiveness. I had already given everything I had. I was done. As the days passed, I struggled to process everything. My heart was in turmoil. My mind was racing, but I still found myself unable to let go of the questions that kept popping into my head. What had driven her to do this? Was it just a moment of weakness? Or had I missed signs of deeper issues between us? Was it all my fault for not being emotionally present? These questions consumed me, adding to my frustration and making me question the very foundation of the life we had built together. I began to spend more time in my head than with her. I couldn't help it. My mind replayed every moment, every conversation, every event in our relationship. I started to see things in a new light, things I had overlooked before. There had been signs of her growing distant long before the affair. But how could I have missed them? Was I so absorbed in my recovery that I failed to see the warning signs? The guilt gnawed at me like a constant companion. But even more than that, the betrayal cut deeper than I ever thought possible. I couldn't just let this go, not when everything felt like it had been built on a lie. There were still so many unanswered questions. So I decided to confront her again, not with anger, but with the desire to get to the truth. The night after our initial confrontation, Claire was unusually distant. She had come home late from work again, and as soon as she walked in, I noticed the familiar defensive posture she had adopted. She didn't want to talk, didn't want to address the elephant in the room. It was clear that she was avoiding the issue, probably because she had no intention of taking responsibility for what had happened. But this time, I didn't want to argue. I wanted answers. I started by asking her about the relationship with the man. I wanted to know how far it had gone, how long it had been happening, and whether she had any genuine remorse for betraying me. At first, she was evasive, shifting the blame onto me, onto my accident, onto everything except herself. She told me that I wasn't there for her, that I had been too focused on my recovery, and that she was simply looking for something more in the meantime. Her words stung, but I didn't let my emotions get the better of me. I had already known that this was part of her defense mechanism. She couldn't admit fault. It was easier to blame me and the circumstances surrounding my recovery. But the more she talked, the clearer it became that she was not sorry, not in the way I needed her to be. She wasn't apologizing for her actions. She was merely justifying them. I felt a cold rage building up in me, not just from her words, but from the realization that I had invested so much of myself into this relationship, and she had thrown it all away without a second thought. The man she had cheated with, someone from her workplace, was nothing more than a temporary distraction for her. She admitted that much, but she had no genuine remorse. To her, it had just been a fling, an escape from the overwhelming pressure of our situation. And that was what hurt the most. She saw it as insignificant. She didn't even seem to grasp the depth of what she had done. Still, I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let her brush this under the rug and move forward as if nothing had happened. I had to know everything, and I needed her to face the reality of the pain she had caused. Then, the most surprising thing happened. Claire started talking about the future, as if this affair was nothing more than a bump in the road. She told me that we could work through it if I was willing to forgive her, that she had already learned her lesson and that this would never happen again. But I could see it in her eyes, the emptiness. She didn't truly understand the magnitude of what had happened. I couldn't bring myself to forgive her. I had no intention of allowing this to be a simple misstep. What I needed from her was genuine remorse, not a plea to fix things. But that's not what she was offering me. Instead of owning her actions, she was offering me empty promises. The more we talked, the more it became clear Claire didn't regret her affair. She regretted getting caught, and that was a bitter pill to swallow. I realized then that there was no point in continuing this conversation, no reason to try to salvage something that had already been tainted beyond repair. I had been living a lie for far too long. It was time to face the truth. She had betrayed me, and there was no coming back from it. I knew what I had to do. It took a few more sleepless nights, but I eventually came to the realization that there was no way forward with Claire. The betrayal, the lack of remorse, the justifications, it all added up to one undeniable conclusion. Our marriage was over. But even with that clarity, the process of coming to terms with it was far from easy. We had built a life together, shared memories, and created something that I had believed was unbreakable. The idea that it could all unravel so quickly, so easily, was a blow I had not prepared for. And yet, I knew deep down that I had no other choice. I had to let go. Claire's reaction to my decision was one of shock and anger. She was furious that I was unwilling to forgive her, but even more so that I had already made up my mind to leave her. She tried to convince me that we could rebuild our relationship, that the affair didn't define us, but it was all empty words. She failed to see that the trust had been shattered beyond repair. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. But it wasn't just Claire's betrayal that weighed heavily on me. It was also the way she dismissed everything we had shared. To her, it seemed like our entire marriage had been a series of trivial inconveniences, things she could brush off in favor of the fleeting excitement of an affair. She didn't value our history, our connection, or the life we had built together. And that was perhaps the most painful part of all. As she pleaded with me to reconsider, something inside me shifted. I realized that I had allowed her to walk all over me for far too long. I had forgiven her for countless small betrayals over the years, excusing her behavior because I believed in our love. But this time, there was no excuse. This was different. This was the ultimate violation of trust, and I was done. I knew I had to take control of the situation. It was no longer about trying to salvage a broken relationship. It was about protecting myself. I had been in the dark for so long, putting up with her lies and manipulation, that I had lost sight of my own worth. But now I saw it clearly. I deserved better. I deserved someone who valued me, someone who saw the importance of loyalty and respect. In the weeks that followed, I took the steps to separate myself from Claire, emotionally and physically. I moved out of our shared home and into a small apartment, trying to adjust to the new reality of my life without her. The process was painful, but necessary. I needed to heal. I needed to rediscover who I was outside of the confines of our marriage. But it was not just the divorce that had to be dealt with. The weight of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, had left me with scars that would take time to heal. I had to confront the emotional aftermath, and that was something Claire didn't understand. To her, it was all just a bump in the road, something that could be smoothed over with a few apologies and promises. But I had seen the truth. The foundation of our marriage was built on lies, and there was no way to rebuild it. Despite her insistence on trying to fix things, Claire's actions spoke louder than any words she could offer. She had chosen her own selfish desires over the commitment we had made to each other. She had not even taken the time to reflect on what she had done. She had no real remorse, no understanding of the gravity of her betrayal, and that made the decision to end our relationship so much easier. As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel a sense of relief. It wasn't immediate. It took time for the anger and hurt to subside, but I eventually began to realize that I was better off without her. I had spent so much time trying to hold on to a relationship that had never been as solid as I had thought. But now, I was free to live my life on my own terms. I was free to heal, to rebuild, and to become the person I was meant to be. I would never forget what Claire had done to me. The scars from her betrayal would always be there, but they would no longer define me. I was stronger than I had been before, and while I would always carry the pain of her infidelity with me, I knew that I could move forward and find the peace I deserved. The weeks that followed the separation were like a blur, a chaotic mix of emotions and moments of clarity. I felt like a shell of the man I used to be. Claire's betrayal had ripped apart my sense of trust, leaving me questioning everything I had believed in. The overwhelming sadness and anger consumed me, and it felt like I was drowning in my own thoughts. Each day, I struggled with the reality that the woman I had spent over a decade of my life with was capable of doing something so hurtful. In the first few days after I moved out, there were moments when I doubted my decision. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had done the right thing. There were times I missed her, the way she used to look at me with warmth, the way we would laugh at inside jokes, the moments we had shared that now seemed like distant memories. But deep down, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. Claire had shown me who she really was, and that was a version of her I could no longer accept. It wasn't just the act of cheating, it was the complete lack of remorse, the indifference she displayed toward me and our relationship. At first, we tried to keep in touch for the sake of handling the practical aspects of the divorce, finances, assets, and the division of everything we had built. But every conversation felt like a chore. Claire would speak as though nothing had happened. Her coldness shocked me. She didn't seem to understand the gravity of her actions, and that only added fuel to the fire of my resentment. I had expected an apology, at least some acknowledgement of the pain she had caused me, but it was as if she had moved on already. Her indifference stung more than the affair itself. I had been discarded without a second thought. But as time went on, I began to find strength in the process. At first, it was hard to see through the fog of hurt and betrayal. It felt like the world around me was crumbling, and I was just trying to stay afloat. Yet little by little, I started to rebuild my life. It wasn't a fast process, it took time, and it took a lot of emotional work. But I began to focus on myself. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with, people who had supported me over the years, but whom I had neglected in favor of Claire. I rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned, things that once brought me joy but had been sidelined in the years I spent focusing solely on my marriage. I began to travel more, explore new places, and find excitement in life again. Every small step I took felt like a victory. There were days when I would catch myself smiling, even laughing, at something as simple as a good movie or a nice conversation with a friend. These moments helped me realize that I wasn't defined by Claire's betrayal, and that I was capable of finding happiness without her. The loneliness was still there, but it no longer consumed me. It became a reminder that I had been through something difficult, and I had survived it. It wasn't long before I stopped longing for the life I had with Claire. The more space I gave myself, the more I came to understand that the relationship we had was not the life I wanted anymore. I had been living for someone else, for someone who had taken me for granted. The woman I had married, the woman I had trusted with my heart, was no longer the same person. She had shown me who she truly was, and it was someone who could betray me without hesitation, someone who didn't value the trust and love I had given. Despite her indifference toward our marriage, Claire tried to reach out to me in the months following our separation. She texted, called, and even showed up at my door a few times. She apologized, at least in a superficial way, and begged for another chance. But I had already come to terms with what had happened. I had grieved the loss of our relationship, and I had processed the pain. More than that, I had grown stronger because of it. The idea of going back to a relationship that had shattered so completely was no longer appealing. I had found a new sense of peace within myself, and I realized that I didn't need her to feel whole. There was a time when I might have considered forgiving her. After all, we had spent so many years together, and I still loved her in some way. But the longer I stayed away from her, the more I recognized that what I had been holding onto was an illusion. I had been mourning the loss of a person who no longer existed. The Claire I had loved had betrayed me, and no apology could undo that. Forgiveness was no longer the issue. It was about respecting myself enough to let go and move on. As I finalized the divorce, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. I was finally free from the shackles of betrayal, free from the constant questioning of my worth. The pain didn't vanish overnight, but it gradually lessened. I had taken back control of my life, and I had the power to create a future that was mine to shape. In the years that followed, I reflected on the lessons I had learned. I realized that no matter how painful an experience may be, it can also be an opportunity for growth. I became a better version of myself because of what I had gone through. And while I would never forget the betrayal that had shattered my heart, I no longer allowed it to control my life. I had healed, and I had learned to trust again. This time it was trust in myself. Looking back, I can say that I am grateful for the strength I found in the aftermath of Claire's betrayal. It was one of the most difficult periods of my life, but it led me to a place of self-discovery and inner peace. And while I will always carry the scars of what happened, I no longer see them as reminders of pain, but as marks of resilience. If you have made it this far, I hope you can relate to the story or find some kind of comfort in knowing that you're not alone in facing challenges like these. Betrayal, heartbreak, and finding your way back to happiness are struggles that many of us experience at some point in our lives. But through the pain, we learn, we grow, and we find a strength we never knew we had. If this story resonated with you, do not forget to like the video, as it helps others who may need to hear this message. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story.